Sandra Bullock secretly crashed Keanu Reeves' quiet birthday night, walking in with a cake and a smile that left him completely stunned. Her simple surprise turned into an emotional reunion filled with memories, laughter, and tears of gratitude. By the end of the night, everyone was reminded how rare and beautiful their decades-long bond truly is. You know that heavy silence that follows you when you're trying to outrun your own thoughts. That was Keanu on this particular Tuesday night, except he didn't know that halfway across the city, Sandra was holding a piece of his past that was about to rewrite the ending he thought was already written. The rain had started as a whisper against the windows of his modest Hollywood Hills home, but by 9 o'clock it was drumming with the kind of insistence that makes you feel like the sky itself is trying to get your attention. Keanu sat on the edge of his leather couch, still in his damp riding jacket, his fingers tracing the rim of a cold mug of tea he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. It was September 2nd, technically his birthday, but he'd stopped marking the date years ago. Too many ghosts, too much noise, too many people telling him he deserved the world when all he wanted was the road and the quiet hum of an engine. He'd spent the afternoon alone on his bike, carving through the canyon roads, trying to outride the strange hollowness that had settled in his chest since he'd turned down that big franchise deal, choosing integrity over a paycheck once again, and wondering if anyone would understand why. Across town, Sandra Bullock was wrestling with a tarp in the back of a rusted pickup truck that definitely did not belong on the manicured streets of Beverly Hills, her hair plastered to her face, her designer boots soaked through. She wasn't supposed to be here. She had a premiere in 48 hours, a nanny waiting at home with the kids, and a publicist who would have a coronary if he knew she was hauling a 1973 Norton Commando through a flash flood warning. But when she'd found the bike, his first bike, the one he'd sold to pay for his sister's medical treatments back when nobody knew his name, sitting in a salvage yard in Reseda, she knew there was no other night but tonight. She had spent 6 months tracking it down, 6 months of secret phone calls and bribes to mechanics, not because she wanted to throw a party, but because she'd seen the look in his eyes 3 months ago at that charity dinner when he'd talked about the things we lose when we choose to take care of others. The truck hydroplaned slightly as she took the final curve up to his gate, her heart hammering against her ribs and not from the driving. In the passenger seat sat a weathered leather journal filled with letters from people whose lives Keanu had quietly changed. Bus drivers he'd given motorcycles to, homeless artists he'd bought studios for, strangers he'd talked down from ledges, all collected without his knowledge, a testament to a kindness he thought went unnoticed. Sandra gripped the steering wheel, knowing that when she knocked on that door, she wasn't just bringing a birthday surprise. She was bringing him back to himself, and she had no idea if he was ready to face the weight of how much he mattered. She killed the engine. The rain seemed to pause. Through the downpour, she saw his silhouette in the window, solitary and still, and just as she reached for the door handle, a sharp rapping on the driver's side window made her jump, her heart lodging in her throat. She turned, expecting security or a paparazzo, but instead found herself staring into the rain-streaked face of a teenage girl no older than 16, clutching a backpack and a helmet, her eyes wide with desperation, mouthing words that Sandra couldn't hear but understood instantly. "I followed you. I need to see him. Please." And in that moment, Sandra realized this night wasn't just about restoring a motorcycle or celebrating a birthday. It was about to become a collision of past and present that would require more courage than she'd prepared for. The word surprise hung in the air a second too long, as if even the night was waiting to see how he would react. Keanu stood absolutely still, helmet still in one hand, eyes moving slowly across the faces in his backyard. Mac, the nervous camera assistant from that rainy night shoot, the film student he'd quietly helped with tuition, a grip he'd once visited in the hospital after an accident. People from 10 different chapters of his life, all standing under warm string lights, staring back at him with the same expression, like they were finally seeing him, not the poster on their wall. Sandra felt her throat tighten when he didn't immediately smile. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd miscalculated everything. Then he blinked, shoulders dropping a fraction, as if he'd just remembered how to breathe. The corners of his mouth lifted, not quite reaching his eyes, but real enough to crack the ice. "You guys," he said softly, voice hoarse. "You're all here." It sounded less like a question and more like someone waking up in a room they'd never expected to see again. Sandra stepped forward with the cake, the ridiculous tower of frosting and rainbow sprinkles glowing with a forest of candles. Wax dripped onto her fingers as she tried to keep her hands steady. "Turns out," she said, forcing her voice to be light, "you're very bad at doing life alone, Reeves. People notice." Laughter rippled through the yard, easy and genuine, cutting the tension in half. He met her eyes then, really met them, and for a second the years between bus sets and now folded in on themselves. There was gratitude there, and something darker, like a shadow standing just behind it. They crowded closer, singing off-key, some too loud, some barely mouthing the words. Keanu looked at the cake like it was an alien object, then up at the small crowd that had somehow squeezed into his quiet world. When the song ended, he didn't make a wish right away. Instead, he scanned each face slowly, his gaze catching on tiny details. The faint limp in Mac's stance, the calloused knuckles of a lighting tech, the lines of exhaustion around a makeup artist's eyes. These were people who knew the grind, the long nights, the invisible work. People he felt more at home with than any tuxedoed crowd. A strange heat rose in his chest, not the choking pressure that had followed him for months, but something closer to ache. "Blow them out before you set my eyebrows on fire," Sandra whispered, leaning in. He smirked, took a breath, and blew. The flames vanished in a rush, smoke curling into the night. A cheer went up. Someone clapped him on the back. The camera assistant wiped at her eyes too quickly, pretending she wasn't crying. For a moment, the burnout, the near miss on the road, the quiet decision he'd made to walk away all blurred at the edges. For a moment, it was just friends and sugar and the smell of melted wax. Stories started spilling out as slices of cake were passed around. Mac launched into the tale of the time Keanu insisted on doing a wire stunt in freezing rain, and then spent the rest of the night handing out towels and hot tea to background actors shivering in paper-thin costumes. The film student, now a confident camera operator, talked about the anonymous envelope that had appeared in her mailbox with just enough money to cover one more semester, and a note scribbled in messy handwriting. "Keep going. The world needs your eye." Every story landed like a small stone in Keanu's chest, building a quiet cairn of proof that his life had been more than fight choreography and box office numbers. He laughed along, genuinely at times, but every now and then his gaze drifted to the dark outline of the hills beyond his fence. The memory of the bike's rear tire skidding on gravel flashed back, sharp and cold. If that tire hadn't caught, he pictured this backyard empty, candles never lit, cake untouched, Sandra waking up tomorrow to news she didn't deserve. His throat closed. The thought slammed into the private plan he'd been holding. Disappear before you break, slip away before people have to watch you crumble. But looking around now, at these quiet faces that had shown up for him without asking for anything, he realized how arrogant that plan was in its own silent way. As if they didn't deserve a say. As if he was the only one who carried weight. "Okay," Sandra called out, clapping her hands to gather attention. "Before he bolts for the mountains or picks a fight with the cake, yes, I know you all need to see this. We've got one more thing." She nodded toward the film student who hurried to the projector, fingers dancing over a laptop. The far wall of the house flickered to life, bathing the yard in a soft, bluish glow. Keanu's stomach dropped. The last thing he wanted on his birthday was a career montage. Posters and gun poses and slow-motion punches. But the first image that appeared wasn't a red carpet. It was a grainy, slightly crooked photo taken from behind, him sitting on a sidewalk in an old beanie, legs crossed, sharing a sandwich with a man whose clothes had seen better days. Someone had captured the moment from across the street. He'd forgotten it had even happened. "He talked to me for 40 minutes, a voice said over the speakers, cracked but warm. "Asked about my kids, made me feel like a person, not a problem. That day I decided I wasn't done trying." The images rolled on. Him laughing with a child in a wheelchair between takes, kneeling to their level, letting them poke curiously at the props on his belt. A selfie video from a stuntwoman in a neck brace, thanking him for sitting in the hospital with her after a fall until her family arrived. A quick, shaky clip of him carrying bags of groceries up 5 flights of stairs for an elderly neighbor in his building, completely unaware someone had filmed it. Each voiceover told a tiny story, not about movies, but about moments. He shifted his weight, jaw tight, eyes shining more than he liked. Humility had always come easily when people praised his work. That praise never felt like it really belonged to him alone. But this was different. This was a mirror he wasn't used to looking into, one that showed pieces of himself he'd never meant to display. A man who tried, in his quiet, imperfect way, to answer the world's cruelty with something softer. The last clip came from an old behind-the-scenes tape, the video quality fuzzy. A much younger Keanu leaned against a fake bus, hair shorter, laugh looser, talking to a younger Sandra whose hands were flapping nervously as she practiced a line. They didn't know a crew member's camera was still rolling. "Promise me something," he said suddenly, serious beneath the boyish grin. "If I ever forget why I'm doing this, if it becomes about the wrong things, just make me stop. Okay." Sandra rolled her eyes in the video, but there was affection there. "You're so dramatic," she teased, then softened. "But okay, deal." The projector paused on that frame. The old him, eyes brighter, asking for a future favor he'd forgotten about. The yard fell into a strange hush. Present-day Sandra stared at the frozen image, her own younger face looking back at her like a ghost that still believed absolutely everything was possible. Beside her, Keanu exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost in the quiet. "Maybe it's time you did," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear, the words heavy with a truth he could no longer outrun. Sandra turned to him sharply, heart kicking hard against her ribs because she heard what he wasn't saying. The noise of the backyard dulled the second Sandra pulled him through the sliding glass door and into the kitchen, the party sounds muffled to a soft hum behind the glass. She didn't flip on the overhead light. Only the under-cabinet glow washed the room in a warm, low yellow. It made the two of them feel like conspirators hiding out between takes, except there were no cameras waiting when they stepped back out. Just life. "What did you mean by that?" she asked, voice low but edged with something sharp. "Maybe it's time I stopped you. That's not a party joke, Keanu." He set the helmet down on the counter with more care than he usually treated his own body. For a long moment he didn't answer. His fingers traced a scratch along the visor as if it could distract him from the question. When he finally looked up, there was no distance in his eyes, no practiced calm for talk shows, just exhaustion, raw and unvarnished. "I almost laid the bike down today," he said quietly. "Some idiot drifted into my lane, I overcorrected. For a second I thought, okay. This is it, this is how it ends. One more headline, one more tragic story people can feel sad about for 48 hours before the algorithm feeds them something else." Sandra's breath caught. "You're okay now, you're here." "Yeah, this time." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "But that's the thing, Sandy. It shouldn't have taken almost dying to make me admit to myself how close I've been to empty for a long time." He gestured vaguely toward the backyard where shadows moved against the curtains. "I look at them, all those people whose lives brushed against mine, and I feel grateful, obviously, but also like a fraud. They see this guy who has it all figured out, who shows up, who stays kind. And yeah, I try. I really, really try. But lately, it feels like I've been pouring from a well that's almost dry." She leaned back against the counter opposite him, crossing her arms, trying to process the way his words dug under her skin. The Sandra the world knew would have cracked a joke, deflected with sarcasm. This Sandra just listened. "So what?" she asked softly. "You think the answer is to disappear, to walk away from everything, from them?" She nodded toward the yard. "From this." He studied her face like he was memorizing it. "From the noise," he corrected. "From the circus, cameras in my grief, microphones shoved in my face every time the world needs a quote about kindness. Doing the same fight in a different hallway again and again while people online say, 'He looks tired,' like it's a punchline." He rubbed the bridge of his nose, suddenly looking older than she'd ever let herself see. "I'm not talking about going somewhere to sulk. I'm talking about finally giving myself permission to stop being a product." She bristled at that. "You're not a product. You're a person I care about who keeps signing contracts that put you on motorcycles at 3 in the morning." "And when I stop," he asked, "who am I then? Do you know how terrifying it is to realize you've built an entire life around being useful? And the second you're not, you don't know if you have the right to take up space anymore." He swallowed, and for a moment his voice almost broke. "So I made a plan before today, before your confetti assault on my backyard." Despite herself, a small smile tugged at her mouth. "There is no confetti. I respected your hatred of vacuuming." He huffed a quiet laugh, the tension easing just a notch. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim, worn envelope, placing it between them on the cool marble. Sandra stared at it like it might explode. "What is that?" "My exit strategy," he said, "or my attempt at not making my exit completely selfish." He nodded toward the envelope. "Open it." She slid a finger under the flap, unfolding several pages densely packed with text and signatures. The first line made her blink. "The Reeves Initiative for Crew and Stunt Resilience," she read aloud slowly. "You started a foundation." "Not started," he corrected. "Starting. I've been meeting lawyers between shoots, sneaking into offices like some wannabe criminal. It's not just charity, it's structure. Emergency funds for crew who get hurt or blindsided by bad contracts. Mental health support for stunt teams and background actors who see some heavy stuff and never get asked if they're okay. Scholarships for the kids of people who hold boom mics for a living. I'm redirecting a lot, the house in the canyon, some investments. It's enough to keep it running for a long time." She flipped through the pages, her eyes widening when she hit the numbers. "Keanu, this is huge." He shrugged, the gesture oddly shy. "Money is only interesting when it moves, right? I've been given a stupid amount of it. Feels wrong to leave the people who actually hold the camera and catch me when I fall to fend for themselves if I'm going to check out of the machine." She looked up sharply. "Check out how far? A break? A year? What are we talking about?" His silence was its own answer. Finally, he said, "There's a cabin up north. No internet unless I hike for it. A lake, trees that don't care who I am. I was going to go next month. Shut it all down for, I don't know, as long as it takes to remember who I am when no one's watching." He hesitated, then added, "I wanted to ask you to help with the foundation, be its public face. You know how to talk to this town and make it listen without sounding like a sermon. And people trust you more than they should, honestly." She laughed, but the sound wobbled. The idea was beautiful and infuriating all at once. He was building something generous, something that would ripple out into lives far beyond his own, and at the same time he was planning to vanish like a ghost before anyone could say goodbye. "You want me to stand on stages and talk about your big heart while you hide in the woods and grow a weird beard?" she asked. "Is that the plan?" "Something like that," he admitted, a spark of amusement glinting through the weariness. "Though the beard is probably inevitable either way." She set the papers down carefully, palms pressing flat on the counter as if bracing herself against a wave. "I love that you want to do this," she said, each word deliberate. "I love that your version of running away still somehow takes care of everyone else. But you don't get to decide alone that you're done being in the world, that you're done showing up where people can see you. You think your presence doesn't matter beyond your movies, but look at that backyard, Keanu. People heal a little just by knowing someone like you is out there trying." He closed his eyes for a moment, pain flickering across his features. "I am so tired of being someone like me, Sandy. I just want to be some guy who reads bad books and burns his toast and doesn't have to smile when he wants to cry." Her own eyes burned now. She took a step closer, close enough to see the tiny flecks of frosting on his shirt from when someone had bumped the cake into him. "Then be that guy," she said softly. "Be him here with us. Take smaller movies, take none, direct, paint, sit in a coffee shop and be weird. Nobody's chaining you to an action sequence. You don't have to disappear to change your life." He looked at her, something like anger and love and fear all tangled together. "You're saying that because you're brave in a way I'm not," he said. "You know how to set boundaries and still stay in the room." He shook his head. "When I stay, I overgive. It's who I am. I don't know how to do this halfway. If I don't pull the plug, the machine will keep running on me until there's nothing left." Before she could answer, a sharp pop cracked through the glass behind them, followed by a chorus of startled yells. Both of them jerked toward the sound. The kitchen window flashed orange for a split second. Sandra was already moving. What was that? They shoved the sliding door open in unison. Outside, one of the overloaded extension cords feeding the projector had sparked, a small section of dry decorations near the fence catching with a hungry, climbing flame. People stumbled back, some grabbing for water, others frozen for a heartbeat in shock. The film student clutched the laptop to her chest, eyes wide, while Max swore under his breath, limping toward the nearest hose. Keanu didn't think. Training and instinct took over. He sprinted across the lawn, shrugging out of his jacket as he ran, smothering one side of the fire while shouting for everyone to move away from the live cord. Heat licked at his hands, smoke burning his throat, but he kept pressing the heavy fabric down until the worst of the flames died with a hiss. Sandra grabbed the hose from Mac and doused the rest, water and ash exploding into the air. In less than a minute it was over, the fire a blackened scar on the fence, a curl of smoke rising into the chilled night. No one was hurt. The guests buzzed with adrenaline, voices overlapping, nervous laughter, exclamations, relief. Someone started clapping, half joking, half sincere. "Of course he saves the day at his own party," the camera assistant said, shaking her head. Keanu straightened slowly, chest heaving, jacket singed at the edges. For a fleeting second, with smoke swirling around him and the string lights flickering overhead, he looked exactly like the man the world knew. Calm in crisis, steady in chaos, the quiet hero in the frame. The role fit him so well it was easy to forget it might be killing him. Sandra watched him from a few feet away, the hose still dripping in her hand, her heart pounding for a different reason now. The yard was safe again, but the question that had cracked open in the kitchen was still hanging between them, bigger than ever. He met her gaze across the trampled grass, eyes searching hers, as the small crowd began to chant jokingly for a speech. In that moment, with smoke still curling, and everyone looking at him with unfiltered trust, Keanu realized he was standing at a crossroads with no more time to stall. Was he about to tell the people who saw him as a lifeline that he was walking away? Or would he find a way to stay without losing himself entirely?